Let's bring in Mark Elias, founder of the Democracy Docket and chair of Elias Law Group.
We have talked so much, Mark Elias, about the SAVE Act, the danger of the SAVE Act, the stakes of the SAVE Act. How is it possible it is effectively dead, and yet we have heard so little about it?
Yeah, so look, it's a good day for democracy. The SAVE Act's dead. Democrats are winning in Virginia. With respect to the SAVE Act, look, the fact is that the Republicans never had the votes in the Senate. And in fairness to John Thune, words you will rarely hear me ever utter, in fairness to John Thune, he told that to Donald Trump. He said there are not the votes to pass this in the Senate. And we have seen that that has come to pass. So you had Mike Lee throwing a bit of a fit on the Senate floor. And one of the things I pointed out at the time, I think actually on your show, is, a filibuster is when you make the other side talk forever. What Republicans did was they filibustered their own bill. They were talking and talking and talking. And the reason is because they never had the votes to pass it. It is still, they don't have the votes to pass it. They don't have the votes to reconciliation. They also have a process problem there. So SAVE Act is dead. But to the point you guys were talking about, this actually makes Donald Trump more dangerous, not less. Right, Donald Trump is ticking through the schemes he has to try to make it harder for him for Democrats to vote. And when that fails, he's going to move to the second part, which is make it easier for him to cheat. And we saw that progression in 2020, and we all know how that turned out.
Mark, let's talk about Florida. Throwback. Some of you will remember that one out there. All eyes now on Ron DeSantis. Now, there's a state law in Florida that was passed a number of years ago which suggested that the state was gerrymandered enough that you could not, in fact, actually redo the maps, that they had to be fair and nonpartisan. It seems that DeSantis and the Republicans in power in the state of Florida seem to be angling to try and create more Republican-leaning House seats in the state. Two questions for you. One, what's the feasibility of them being able to push it through and get around that state law? And two, what's the timing look like? Could they, in theory, pull this off ahead of the November midterms?
Yeah, look, I think they got three problems. The first, as you point out, is actually not a state law. It's actually in the state constitution. And it was put there by the voters of Florida, who overcame opposition from Republicans and put in the state constitution a prohibition against partisan gerrymandering, disadvantaging a party or a candidate based on their party. And this, it would clearly violate it. And if Republicans think I am not serious about this, I've sued using this provision before and blocked their maps, and will do so here if they violate it again. So that's number one. Number two, look, they have a fundamental problem with math, which is that Florida's already really gerrymandered. And so if they try to gain more Republican seats, and certainly if they try to gain the kind of numbers that Donald Trump is pushing them to do, they are going to spread themselves too thin, and it will backfire. And I say that as someone who did not say that about Texas. A lot of Democrats were saying, it's going to be a dummy mander. I'm like, no, it's not going to be a dummy mander. Probably won't be 5 seats, maybe 3 seats, but it's not going to backfire. In Florida, they face a real likelihood that if they try to add more seats, they will actually net lose seats because of the shifting unpopularity of Republicans. And the third problem is that I think it's going to be hard to get the state legislature to go along with this. These Republicans in Florida are looking at the polls themselves. And so I think DeSantis has boxed himself in here, but I can promise him this. Ron DeSantis, you pass an illegal map, you're going to get sued, and you're going to get sued fast. And yes, we are going to get relief for 2026.
Well, Mark Elias said it. We will be watching what happens in Florida. I mean, just months ago, the state Senate president in Florida sent out a memo to the legislatures, Mark, basically being like, well, I don't know if we should do this. So to your point, it might not even happen. We will see what goes down next week. Can we go back to where we started this conversation with you? Because I'm glad you validated my concern, because I do think more people should not just be resting on the laurels of all the progress that Democratic candidates have made across the board. I think they're actively working to try to rig this next election. And they're trying to do it in every which way possible. They could just, get a better message and a better platform to earn the votes, but maybe that's just too old school, Mark. How does the Supreme Court play into this? Because I'm thinking about Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act. We are still waiting on a decision on a challenge to pieces of that. And I'm further concerned that the Supreme Court could gut Section 2, and that would also affect the midterms.
Yeah, so there are three cases that I am actively following relating to voting in election. One, I argued in December before the Supreme Court that involves money in politics, and we are waiting on a decision there. The Republican Party is trying to get their wish list on that front through, so we'll see what happens. The second is a case that comes out of Mississippi involving whether mail-in ballots that are postmarked by Election Day but received a few days afterwards can be counted or not. The Republican National Committee brought a lawsuit. Again, I'm on the other side of that lawsuit in the Supreme Court. And the question is whether or not that is going to throw out valid votes all throughout this country in like 19 states or not. And then the third is the Louisiana case, the Calais case, involving whether Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act will continue. Look, here's my sense. On the Section 2 case, it's getting awfully late for anything there to happen that would impact the 2026 election. That doesn't mean we should be lulled into false sense of security. It may be that the conservatives are holding this case precisely so that we don't overreact in their view. We underreact in my view, because it won't affect 2026. But that is a critical case. All of these cases will define not just the playing field in 2026, but in 2028 and beyond, and they should all be top of mind.
To Simone's point about how they're now pivoting to other mechanisms, Simone had shared this with the three of us earlier, and we all sort of had the same take. I want to see if you agree. This is from the New York Times about a denaturalization push that is coming from this White House. The Justice Department targeting hundreds of citizens, a new push for denaturalization. The message it sends is that naturalized citizens don't have the same rights and stability as native-born citizens, said Amanda Frost, a law professor at the University of Virginia. Should we be reading this story as an immigration story or as an election story, Mark?
It's both. I mean, look, the fact is that the birthright citizenship case is another way of trying to take away people's citizens' rights, but it's also a voting case, because one of the ways that Republicans say you need to prove citizenship, well, how do you do that? You do it through a birth certificate. Well, if birth certificates no longer prove citizenship, Republicans are able to disenfranchise more voters. A denaturalization story, that also fits in with the fact that the Republican Attorney General, the Department of Justice, is trying to get access to voter records on every single American, in all 50 states. I'm fighting them in 30 lawsuits about that. Why are they trying to get those records? Well, they say it's to run it against a citizenship database. The president has issued an executive order saying that he believes he can give a list to the states of who gets to vote based on citizenship. Well, here's an example of what I've been trying to tell people. This is not Donald Trump trying to have a bunch of bureaucrats run data and come up with lists that are objective. He's going to call balls and strikes on who is a citizen and who's not. And that is the great threat to voting this election. Remember, after lying about Barack Obama's birth certificate for years, he continued to lie and say he was not a citizen. We cannot assume that any of these things involved citizenship are going to be objective. They are all aimed at kicking out of the political process people Donald Trump doesn't want to include and putting into the process people he does.